admit a couple of people from the waiting room. Don, will you be monitoring that waiting room while we're
Yes, I've got it.
Okay. All right, so it is now 12:10. I think we should begin. Don, if you'd like to start the recording.
Yep, got it.
That would be great. And I am actually going to turn my camera off in order to avoid any problems with uploading from my home. So no, I'm here. You're not hearing a ghost, that's for sure. And I'll go ahead and present. So first, I'd like to say good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for your interest in global grants and being here today to learn all about them. And I hope we're all able to do great projects together in the year to come. Just a couple of little things before we get going. Chuck Preto is going to be monitoring the questions. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, go ahead and type them into the chat. We have over 200 people on this presentation today, so we can't really have people interjecting with their voices. So put it in the chat, and if it's really relevant at the time, he'll go ahead and interrupt me to answer it. Otherwise, we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. And also, I'm sure you've heard this 100 million times during this last year, but please put yourself on mute, because with this many people, we just can't have a lot of background noise going on. So with that, I will go ahead and begin. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is much and almost everything of what I'm going to say can be found in this document right here, A Guide to Global Grants. It should be your Bible if you are trying to write a grant, with a couple of exceptions. This was published in 2019, and as many of you are aware, there have been a couple of very recent changes to the rules, which I will point out as we go through this, which are outdated in this document. I expect Rotary International to come out with a new version very quickly. Otherwise, they're going to have so many inquiries, they're not going to be able to handle them all. So there's just a couple of things in here that are outdated, but certainly 99.9% of it is relevant. It will walk you through how to do grants. And if you have any questions, it's in this document. It really has everything in there. So how do I find this document? Well, like almost everything else in Rotary, you're going to start out going to My Rotary. And this is where you find it. You go to My Rotary, you click first on Take Action, number 1, and then 2, Apply to Grants, and then 3, Grants Center. And you also need to know that all of these slides will be available, so you can go back and refer to them later if you're not catching this right now. So here you arrive at the Grant Center, and this is going to be your central place where you will get almost all the information you could ever need, or anything else, when you are writing your grant on the Rotary International online site. So it lands you at Grant Center, and then you're going to click right here in the right-hand corner where it says Resources. I think I have a weird thing on there. Hang on a second. There we go. Okay, so you click on Resources, and then you get a drop-down screen, and it has, I had to do this in 2 slides for screenshots because it's so long, but it has many, many, many bits of information that you will need, and I'll refer to throughout this presentation, that you will need. There's an area focused policy statements, community assessments, memorandum of understanding that you'll need, a global grants calculator. Scroll down further, and here where you see the big red arrows is that Guide to Global Grants. You click that, it will be downloaded onto your computer, and then you have your very own copy of the Guide to Global Grants to keep beside you as you're writing your grant. There's also a number of other tools, which we'll talk about in a moment. So let's start at the 30,000 foot level. What is a global grant? First, it is a large, long-term project. These are not the quick in and out like our district grants, where sometimes it takes a couple of weeks to get it done. They are sustainable. You are required to have measurable outcomes, which can be reported. They have to align with the Rotary Foundation's areas of focus, and it requires an international partnership. And we'll go into quite a bit more depth on each one of those. First, I'd like to go over once again our 7 areas of focus now. For those of you that have been around for a while with this grants program, you know that it was 6 up until recently. And starting July 1st of this year, we have a new area of focus called supporting the environment. Another change for this year is there have been a couple of very subtle changes to the names of our area of focus. The most significant, I think, is the peace building one. It used to be peace and conflict resolution. And now I think the Rotary Foundation has become much wiser in what it is we really want to do. And it's called peace building and conflict prevention. So a couple of small changes there, but the biggest one is this new area of focus, supporting the environment. Now, when you're thinking about these areas of focus, well, a very logical question is, what do those areas of focus mean in the eyes of the Rotary Foundation? Well, just like many other things, there's a document for that, and it can be found under those resources that I showed you how to get to. And it's here by the blue, shown by the blue arrow, called the Areas of Focus Policy Statements. If you download that document, it has under each area of focus specific guidelines as to what the Rotary Foundation considers applicable to those areas of focus. So when you're organizing a global grant, I strongly suggest you download that document. You make sure that your project fits into one of those areas of focus very specifically. So as I said, global grants are big. The minimum budget for a global grant is $30,000. So it requires a bit of funding, a bit of planning, and often working with a number of clubs and/or districts. And for global grants, you get some World Fund match. In the past, you used to get, there used to be a minimum World Fund match, and we'll talk about the formula for how that's done a bit later. But now there is no minimum. This is a new change for this year, one of the things that is not in that Guide to Global Grants. And the maximum is $200,000 under normal circumstances. There's a couple of exceptions for very, very large grants, but we're not going to go into that today. So, as I mentioned earlier, global grants require an international partnership. There needs to be a host club and an international club as the primary partners on this grant. Now, the host club is the club that is on the ground in the location where the project is going to be done. That's the definition of host, meaning geographically in the country and hopefully near the location where the project is happening. The international club is any club that's from another country, not the country where the project is taking place, that is interested in this and wants to work with the host club to do this project. Now, the international club must contribute at least 15% of the funding for this grant. This is a new rule as well. It used to be 30%. It has now been lowered to 15%. And there are a couple of exceptions to that, however, and one of those is when term gifts are involved. And I'm not going to go again into great detail about what that is, but if you have any questions and that specific thing comes up, I'll be happy to assist with that. So how do you find partners for global grants? This is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult parts of doing a global grant is establishing a good partnership with a host and an international club. Well, there's many ways to try to find those partnerships that you need. One of the best ones is at the Rotary Convention, or I should say one of the best ones up until last year and this year, because in a virtual environment, it is much harder to do. But hopefully we'll all be able to go to Houston next year and interact with Worldwide Rotarians, and it will then become again a great way to find partner clubs. Project fairs are another good way. We've had a couple of project fairs virtually during COVID, but many districts, once travel restrictions are lifted, will have project fairs in person. So in a way, it's sort of like a mini convention opportunity to go to a specific country and learn about projects in their areas and find things you may be interested in. Many people connect with other clubs through LinkedIn, Facebook, WhatsApp, all kinds of social media. Any Rotary event is a great opportunity to network, whether it be a district event, a zone event, an international event. Constantly network. And then there's a couple of online resources that I would recommend. One is matchinggrants.org, which those of you in the district grant training learned a little bit about already, but this is a website built by our own PDG Philippe, where people can list their projects, and you can see projects that need funding, that may be looking for partners. So you can peruse there and find projects and become part of grants and meet up with people through the contacts you see there. Also, Rotary.org has a section called Rotary Ideas, which is also a nice place and to exchange information and potentially find partners for projects. You have to have on your application a global grant committee, and that basically means that from both the host and the international clubs, you need a primary contact and then 2 additional club members for the grant committee. Now, one of the things that we have found in rare circumstances, but it does happen, is sometimes something happens to the primary contact. So if you have a project in your club and you have a primary contact that is really driving that project, please try to involve 2 additional club members and keep them intimately involved with the project. Because if something happens to that primary contact, maybe they have to move, maybe they become ill, those additional grant committee club members are going to have to jump in and help get this project completed and get the report done so that your club is not without the ability to do grants in the future. So really try to keep those committee members involved with the projects for your club, because we never know what's going to happen to the primary contacts. So to do global grants, one of the things that is required is a community assessment. And on the right, you see a picture of a publication called the Community Assessment Tools. And I bet you all can guess right where to find that. And this started really just a few years ago because we found that sometimes global grants were being done that weren't really meeting the community needs, not because of people not having good intentions, but they just really weren't understanding what the needs of the community were. We talked about this a little bit in the international service breakout today. We need to do projects that are based on real needs. And so this tool allows us to identify resources that our clubs have, potential partners have, and it forces both the host and the international committees for the project to talk to the community to figure out what it is they really need and what would really help them. There's several methods which are used for community assessments, and these are outlined in great detail in the publication I just showed you, but I have a few examples that I'm showing you here. Surveys, we all know what those are. Having a community meeting where you exchange ideas and people bring up their concepts of needs. Interviews with community members. Focus groups, this is where you get small groups of people together with some pretty structured questions to figure out what is needed. Something called an asset inventory. This may be an inventory of what type of electricity is available, for instance, or what type of water is available. Another one is community mapping, which I really liked because I learned this when I was first learning about this. And what community mapping is you make basically a rough map of the community and mark the geographical locations of certain resources to help perhaps identify an area where that resource is not very geographically available. There are quite a few other for community assessment. Interestingly enough, the Rotary Foundation does not condone voting as an adequate method for community assessments because of the possibility of not necessarily interacting with community members directly. So that publication will give you more information about that. And here I've showed you on that Grant Center resources page exactly where you can find the community assessment tool. Again, we're going back to our areas of focus. I can't stress this enough. And there is the policy statements that are available for those. One important bit of advice, I always stress this, and I'm sorry I preach on this for those of you that have heard this presentation many times before, but only pick one area of focus for your grant. This is really, really important. Most of us do projects that, oh, well, that's basic education. It's also community economic development. And, we'd like to say of the 7 areas of focus, it fills 3 or 4 of them. But if you check that on your application and say that it's going to do, let's say, 3 areas of focus, that means it has to be reviewed by 3 different area of focus reviewers, and each of them will judge that application based on 3 different sets of outcome measures. You will have 3 different sets of very specific questions that will come back about your application, which you will then have to answer. So the streamlined way to get your grant through is pick one area of focus. So you have one reviewer, one set of questions, and one set of outcome measures, which you will need to adhere to. As I said, one of the important things for global grants is they must be sustainable. And what does that mean? Sustainable means we need to give a community skills and knowledge to maintain project outcomes for the long term, long after our grant funds have been expended. And this is a direct quote from the Rotary Foundation. So if you look at this then necessitates the need that every grant should have some kind of training component, so that whatever it is you do in the community, whether it's imparting medical knowledge or building a well, the people in the community need to have gained the skills and knowledge to maintain whatever it is you are trying to accomplish. Now, when we talk about sustainability, the Rotary Foundation has very carefully outlined exactly what they mean by that. To build sustainability in a project, first, you start with the community. We talked about this in the assessment. We want to meet community needs. Secondly, it is important to encourage local ownership. This is not a project that just someone comes in from the outside and does. No, this is a project that the local community is doing, and we are helping facilitate or providing resources so that the local community can own that project. We just talked about the aspect of providing training so that it can be sustained. Whenever possible, you should buy equipment and technology from local sources. This helps contribute to the local ownership. It contributes to the local economy, and it's something that the Rotary Foundation reviews very carefully in each and every application. Next, you need to find some kind of local funding to help this project continue long after your project is done. This may be, in the case of, say, water wells, there's a very nominal fee for the water when people come to collect it, so that can be used to maintain it. That's a very good way. Another method is to complete your project and then hand it over to the government and get local, whether it be local, state, national government, the buy-in to help continue this project and keep it going. Other organizations also can, local organizations where the project is done, can buy in and help with funding. And finally, measure the outcomes. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So you must build a monitoring and evaluation plan as part of your grant. It's important to establish clear project goals very early in the planning phase. And then there are Rotary Foundation standard measures for each and every type of project you do. And it is specific for each area of focus. And these, it sounds like it might be a little onerous to do, but actually what happens is when you go to fill in your Rotary, the application on the Rotary Foundation grant site, there's a drop-down menu that lists all these standard measures. And so you can select which ones you will choose to monitor and measure for your grant that the Rotary Foundation is specifically looking for. And they do require you to have some standard measures. Then there's also very specific project measures that you will probably want to do that don't really apply to a lot of other projects, but it's very specific to yours. So on your application, you also have the opportunity to enter project-specific measures, which you enter on your own as unique to your project. Once you figure out what your standard and project-specific measures are going to be, you will establish a baseline data set. You know, what level are you starting from in terms of these measures, and what methods are you going to use to collect your data? And all this is submitted as part of your online application. I'll show you some screenshots about how that's done later on. And then during the project is very important, of course, to collect the data so that you can later report it and monitor the progress. And then finally, you'll evaluate your results and submit that in your online reporting, which is part of the grant process. So here's some examples of some of the Rotary Foundation standard measures. And most of these make complete sense to as you're thinking about a project. The number of direct beneficiaries. This is for many of the areas of focus. This is one of the standard measures, as well as indirect beneficiaries. Well, what is an indirect beneficiary? Well, one example might be if you're providing training, say, for 5 nurses, okay? So the direct beneficiaries would be 5 nurses. The indirect beneficiaries would be all those other people that those 5 nurses are maybe planning on training. So maybe each of those 5 nurses are going to do 5 different trainings of 100 apiece. So you multiply 100 times 5 events times 5 nurses, and that gives you your number of indirect beneficiaries. The others are also very obvious: the number of people receiving a service, number of participants, number of events, if you're doing health camps or dental clinics or something like that, number of jobs created, number of benefiting facilities, and there's quite a few more. I just picked a few from some of the various areas of focus. Standard measures, and you'll see those on your application. So they're really not onerous, and most of them make complete sense for almost any project that one could imagine. So how does the Rotary Foundation matching funds work? Well, when you put together a grant, there's three components. There is cash donations that comes from, in our district, clubs. Then there is something called district designated funds, which are funds that we have allocated at the district level, which we can apply to grants. And I'll talk to you about how we do that. And then there is Rotary Foundation matching funds to help multiply our monies that we have. So when you put together a grant, you do your cash donations by clubs. And this year, much to the chagrin of many of us, there is no Rotary Foundation match for club cash that you put into a grant. It's important to note that for your club cash, you also have to add 5%, which will stay with the Rotary Foundation to cover administrative costs for your grant. And there is a way that this can be avoided, however, which I'll talk about in a few minutes when we talk about project bank accounts. And then there is district designated funds, which are matched at 80%. And I'll talk about our district rules as to how district designated funds are applied to your grant in a moment. So here's an example of how financing might work for a district grant. But this is one little example. I would point to our Global Grants Calculator at Grant Center, which gives you a spreadsheet. You can put in all different kinds of numbers and play with it to work out your budget. But as one example, let's just say several clubs got together and cumulatively they had $15,000 in cash, which they wanted to put towards a project. Then those clubs cumulatively would be eligible for $15,000 of district designated funds. Then the Rotary Foundation match would be at the level of 12,000 or 80% of this 15,000 in DDF to give you a total project budget of $42,000. So the interesting thing about this calculation is here, your clubs have really only raised $15,000 in hard cold cash for this project. And they're able to come up with a total budget of $42,000 to be spent for your project through these other funding sources. And here again, I've showed you the orange arrow, where exactly to find that global grant calculator on the Rotary International website at the Grant Center. It's an interactive spreadsheet that has formulas embedded, so you can enter club cash, you can enter DDF, it does the calculations about how much the 5% is, how much the Rotary Foundation will match, and then what your total budget can be. So you can just really play with it there. It's very useful. Now, I want to make a brief aside here. Most of the projects that I've been talking about thus far have been humanitarian projects, some of the more typical projects that we talk about. But your standard global grant application, there's two other types of projects, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. There are some special supplements that have to be done for these other type of projects. And if you need assistance with these, they're not very common. I'll be happy to help with you. And also in that guide to global grants, there's very clear guidance on what the difference are. And these other two types of projects are global grant scholarships, which are specifically to provide scholarships for graduate level study. These are not for undergraduate study, graduate level study only, for people who are studying within the areas of focus of Rotary. You can do global grants for scholarships. And then there's also something called a Global Grant Vocational Training Team. And this is basically a grant where the purpose is to send a team of people to another country to either be trained or receive training. It's very, very specific, and there's a special supplement for that too. So that's all I'm really going to say about those at this time. If you have other questions, I'll be happy to help you later. Okay, so there's something called club qualification, which a club must meet in order to do a global grant and to receive DDF. Some of these requirements come from the Rotary Foundation, and some of them are specific to our district. Now, one of the most important values of doing a global grant is it helps clubs get access to district designated funds to further amplify their funds, which I showed you just a minute ago how that happens. I have the first and foremost qualification here in bold because it is new for this next year, and I think it's something that needs everyone's attention right now. To qualify for any global grant DDF from our district, your Rotary Club must have achieved a minimum of $100 per capita giving to the annual fund, or a club total of at least $20,000 for the 2021 Rotary year. Now, this may catch some of you by surprise, but don't panic. We have several months before the end of the Rotary year, and your club has the opportunity to achieve this if you want to do a global grant. These numbers are available. Your president has access to knowing exactly where your club is at this time. And I want to just really stress this here because this is something that after June 30th, you can't go back and make this up. Your club needs to have contributed to the annual fund at this level. Just as a brief aside, in order to do district grants, you have to have at least a $50 per capita contribution. And we looked at these numbers just last week, our foundation leadership group, and many clubs have met this barrier of 100 per capita and are well beyond it. But there's other clubs out there that aren't even qualified to do district grants right now. So I encourage each and every one of you to go to your club presidents. If you are a club president, look into this and get that giving level up if you want to do district or global grants next Rotary year. To qualify, you must also have all your district and your Rotary International dues up to date. That pretty much goes without saying. There is a Rotary Foundation Memorandum of Understanding, which each club must sign in order to do a global grant. Now, this is kind of interesting because it needs to be signed by your 21-22 president and your 22-23 president. And you say, why so far ahead? Well, global grants are typically longer projects. So we want to make sure that the leadership for just more than 1 year signs this memorandum of understanding and understands what it is to do a global grant. I'll show you where you can download that. It is available on our district website. And once that's done, that needs to be emailed to Marianne Erickson, who is our stewardship chair, and she will upload that to her database and to help qualify your club. Now, here's another very important thing. Of course, we are doing this training virtually right now, so we can't really take attendance. We certainly can't keep up with who's actually paying attention versus who's eating their lunch right now or cooking or watching television or whatever. So we're requiring that 2 members attend this training, either now in person like all of you are, or it's going to be recorded. They can watch it later if your club wasn't able to have 2 members here. And then there is an assessment quiz that must be completed. And that assessment quiz needs to be completed by each of you as well, because this is the only way we are tracking attendance. So where will you find that assessment quiz? First, you'll go to our district website, which is rotary5340.org. Second, you'll click on Foundation Once you get there, you'll click on Foundation, and then you'll click on Grants. And once you get there, you'll get to a screen like this, which will have your Global Grants quiz. This is what you'll need to click on and complete it in order to document your attendance at this training. This is also where you'll find your club memorandum of understanding, which for your club to qualify, you'll need to download and have next year's and the following year's president sign. And there'll also be a recording of this seminar, which others can listen to, or if you need to go back and look at slides or the recording in order to pass the quiz, that's fine too, or just refer to the slides with information that you find useful. They will both be there for you. One of the questions we often get about that club memorandum of understanding is, what if we don't know who our president's going to be in 22, 23? Well, your best guess is who you should have sign it. If you haven't decided for sure, if there's someone who's a top contender, whoever you think might be your president, if it hasn't actually been documented, please have that person sign the memorandum of understanding. Further things that are important for your club qualification to do a global grant. All your grant reporting must be up to date. If you have other global grants that are in process, the Rotary Foundation will literally send back the application, say we can't approve it because there's an overdue report on this, that, or the other grant. Each club is able to have up to 10 active grants at the same time. So if you're trying to apply for an 11th grant, that will not get approved. This is also very important. Your club must enter your Rotary Foundation giving goals in order to qualify to get Club DDF. This was instituted last year because people weren't entering their foundation giving goals. So we made this rule so that clubs are forced to enter in order to get any DDF. Now, one important little caveat here is the club president can't enter the goals for next Rotary year until July 1st, 2021. That's the way the Rotary Foundation website works. So if you have a grant ready to go before that, we can approve DDF as long as everything else is in place, but it will be contingent upon having those goals entered by the time we authorize, or July 1st. Okay, now there are some very specific rules about how district designated funds are allocated within our district. And I do need to stress here, and this question came up, I think, in the interim, the DDF rules about how DDF is allocated are very specific and different for every district. So these rules only apply to our district. They don't apply to any other district. And if you're working with another district, you really have to inquire about what their rules are. This is what the rules that we have for our district, because we know what the demand is. We know what our issues are here in this district. And so these are the rules that our foundation committee and district governor have agreed to. For next Rotary year, 21-22, each club will be eligible for up to $10,000 in district designated funds for global grants. This is totally separate from the district grants. However, that DDF has to match club cash. So if you want to receive $10,000 in DDF, you also have to contribute $10,000 in club cash. Only matching DDF is approved. So if you enter a grant that says, $1,000 our club's going to put in and you want $5,000 of DDF, the answer is no. To get $5,000, you have to enter that you're going to put in $5,000 worth of cash. Clubs are encouraged to work together to do bigger grants so that you can have several clubs contributing cash and several clubs contributing their DDF so that you can do bigger projects. Also, that $10,000 in DDF does not have to be for one project. You can decide to use $2,000 of your DDF for one, $5,000 for another, and $3,000 for another, for example. It can be split across a number of projects. It's important to note that no single project will get more than a total of $40,000 in DDF collectively from our district. So in order to get your DDF approved, the grant has to be entered on matchinggrants.org, and it has to show as fully pledged. And I'll go through how to do that in a moment. And of course, all of our grants must comply with our youth protection policy if youth are involved and it applies to that particular project. So in order to request your district designated funds for a global grant must be entered on matchinggrants.org. And I've got a few screenshots here to kind of go through and show you how to do that. Go to matchinggrants.org, click here where the red arrow is on global grants. Once you get to global grants, you look at the menu up top and you see where the red arrow is, and you click submit project. And that brings you to a screen that looks like this, which is very self-explanatory, and you just fill in the information as requested. You will click one area of focus. This is an old screenshot, so it only shows the 6. There will be 7 for the upcoming Rotary year. And then you provide a project description. You'll need to enter your host and international partner. Sometimes when you're looking at first entering this, you may or may not have an international partner identified. So that is optional to fill that in when you first do it. And then you'll need to put in what your total budget is. And so this is what an example of what it may look like. And then when you go to matchinggrants.org and maybe you want to participate in a project that someone else is doing, you can click on this pledge support for a project and enter pledges. And other people, other clubs, other districts can pledge to your project that way too. So it gives a way to help fund your project. Now, when you click on support a project, it's going to ask for a couple of things. And this is where you can fill in the amount of cash that you're going to contribute to a project and the amount of DDF. Now, remember what I told you. If you're going to put in $1,000 of cash, you can do up to $1,000 of DDF in our district. And then you click save, and that's how you enter it. And that really is how the DDF is requested, simply by filling this in. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. Note that it is a request. Okay. So then when you get to the financing page for a particular project, this is what shows up. These are all the different clubs and districts that have pledged for this grant and the DDF that they have requested. And when it shows up in this grayed out version, that means it's been requested but not approved by the District Foundation Committee. Now, only when this additional club contribution needed goes to 0 will the grant actually be fully pledged. And that's the only time where the District Rotary Foundation Committee will consider these DDF requests. So if you look on this one, at the time this was taken, there were 2 clubs in our district, both of which were requesting $10,000, but it's not approved yet because this very large grant was not fully funded. The document section here is where you can upload invoices, any information that helps support your grant process. Okay. Now, when you're working on matchinggrants.org, it's really, really important, and I know this was discussed in the district grants thing too, is when you enter new information, click refresh on your screen if you don't see it come up. We get questions all the time. Oh, I entered this pledge and I went back to the financing page and I didn't see it. Well, click refresh. And then you will see your changes. If after clicking refresh, you still don't see your changes, then you probably did something wrong and didn't enter it properly. So, global grant DDF approval. In our district, global grant DDF are considered on an ongoing basis. There is no deadline like there is for district grants. We will consider DDF for global grants at any time that it gets to the fully funded stage. Well, I shouldn't say any time. Realistically, we do it at the next Rotary Foundation meeting after it's been fully pledged. The caveat is we only approve it until all the DDF is depleted. And you heard earlier, there is a limited supply. This year, unaccounted for, we have approximately $80,000 available for global grants. Now do the math. We have 63 clubs in our district and each is eligible for up to $10,000. So that means not everybody is going to do a global grant and get the full amount of DDF. So my advice is to submit your grant fully pledged on matchinggrants.org as early as you possibly can so that your club gets whatever share of that $80,000 of available DDF that they can. And we also always try to tell clubs that if we get to a situation where we have to choose between projects, there will be some consideration of project merit and annual giving to the Rotary Foundation, because that's where these funds come from in the first place. So once you have entered your grant onto matchinggrants.org, you've gotten it fully pledged, you've received approval for your DDF, you can then submit your grant to the Rotary Foundation, which requires authorization from the district in order to do that. Now, it's not necessary that you wait for that DDF approval before you start writing your grant at the Rotary Grant Center. I usually recommend that while you're building your funding, whatever, start writing the grant at the Grant Center, because you can save it as a draft at any point in time until it really is complete. And it takes a little bit of time to do. So now you're ready to write your grant at the Grant Center, which I showed you how to get to, and you'll click here where the red arrow is, where it says apply for a grant. Once you do that, you get this screen which pops up. Once again, there's a number of resources which will show up on the side for you, many of which we've talked about already. And you start to fill in your application. In order to save it, you have to have very, very minimal information, and then a grant number will be issued as a draft. You have to name your project. And then this section here, this is what I told you about, where there's 3 main types of global grants. The vast majority of your grants will be humanitarian projects. If by chance you're doing one of the others, you would click those, and that requires some additional supplements. And then you have to add in your primary host and international host contact information in this section. And at that point, you can save this and you will be given a grant number. One of the things that I suggest is if people really are going to do grants, is you can go in, and they just started this a couple years ago, and you can name your project test. You can click humanitarian project. You can add anybody for, well, the primary contact has to be you, whoever is logged into my Rotary as either the primary or the international, but you can enter anyone else and save it and start playing around with the application to see how it works. And then you will have there's a little thing that pops up here that says delete grant. So if you're doing a dummy grant, you can delete it later. I've done this many times in trainings. And it's a very helpful thing to do. The grant status right here will say draft as soon as you save it the first time. When it's all complete, it'll say authorizations required. And then after all the authorizations have been done, it'll say submitted, and then it'll say paid, and then it'll say completed. So you have all those statuses. Now, after you fill that out and you save it, this application, I think it kind of gets a bad rap because to me, now granted, I'm pretty familiar with it, but it really does walk you through the steps. So you see here, that was the first step that I just showed you. And then you have steps 2 through 10. You'll click on each of these sections and up pops a new window with very specific questions, specific drop-down menus, and it really walks you through everything you need at each step of the application process. Now, I'm not going to go through the details of that today. However, I will tell you that I have done some trainings in the past where everybody's on their computer and we all actually do a dummy grant. We go through each and every one of those steps. I'm willing to do that again if there is enough need or interest in doing that, but it does take a couple of hours in and of itself just to do that. Down here at the bottom, you'll see step 12, authorizations. That is something actually you don't have to worry about. It is automatically populated. It includes people like the district governors from both districts, the primary contacts, the district Rotary Foundation chairs, a number of people that automatically get populated, which then get an email. And those people have to go on and say, yes, I approve of this funding is one of the big things, because very often in these grants, you're spending our district DDF, right? So we have to say, yes, we approve this because we already have internally approved it. And we said, yes, these funds are allocated for this grant. So that's what the authorizations are. And those authorizations will not be completed if your club has not met all of the criteria that we talked about earlier, and the per capita giving and all of those things. So you can go through and do the whole grant process and everything else, but your district governor and your district Rotary Foundation chair will not authorize this grant, and it will not be considered if you haven't met those requirements. So now you've gone through your whole process of applying for your grant. It's been authorized. You've answered the questions they've come back with, and your grant is approved. One of the things you must have for a global grant is a project-specific bank account. This cannot be a sub-account of your club operating account or part of your club foundation account or anything like that. It has to be a separate specific bank account, and the Rotary Foundation wants the name on that bank account to be your global grant number or some type of project name. You can't have a project bank account that's called the Rotary Club of Del Mar. It has to be specific to that project. And it's very important that no funds are commingled in this account. The Rotary Foundation will wire funds to this account for the project, and this includes the DDF. Okay. The cash that the clubs have pledged, there's two ways it can be given to the project. Two main ways. One is, let's say a club pledges $5,000 for a project. It's been approved. You have the bank account. You can send that $5,000 check to the Rotary Foundation. If that happens, If individuals have contributed part of that, they can receive Paul Harris credit. The club can get credit for their donation to the Rotary Foundation, thereby getting points. It's very complicated, but if it goes through TRF, there are some benefits and you get some credit from the Rotary Foundation. Note that if you do that, there is a 5% surcharge in order to help you get that Paul Harris credit and for the Rotary Foundation to administer those funds. Another thing that can happen is you can take that $5,000 and just deposit it in the project specific bank account rather than sending it to the Rotary Foundation. If you do that, there's no Paul Harris credit, there's no points, there's no any of those things, but you do not have to submit the 5% surcharge if you do that. So you save a little bit of money, but you don't get the benefits that come with donating through the Rotary Foundation. So that is an individual choice in each and every situation. Also note that if you do send it directly to the project bank account, then you will have to show the Rotary Foundation that those funds have been deposited by showing basically a statement or a printout of activity in the account before they will wire whatever funds they have, which includes the Rotary Foundation match and the district designated funds. Okay. And I want to stress here, because we very often get this question, the district designated funds that are designated for a global grant never actually come to our district. That money really resides at the Rotary Foundation, but it is sort of ours to allocate to different projects. So once your project is approved, it will automatically get sent from the Rotary Foundation. There is nothing from our end we have to do. Sometimes I get inquiries from people saying, oh, can you write the check for the district designated funds to the bank account? None of that has to be done. It all goes directly from the Rotary Foundation, and we've authorized it on the application. They know, and so there is no exchange of hands on our district part with regard to those funds. Okay, and this is the point that I made, but I wanted to have it here in yellow so that when people go back to these slides, they'll remember that point, that we don't touch those funds. It just happens, the district designated funds. Okay, so once your grant's approved, you've got the money, now it's time to actually do the project. Well, it's very important that we properly manage our grants. And what does that mean? We have to have proper financial controls. We have to adhere to technical standards. We have to make sure and guarantee that whatever the project is meeting the needs of our beneficiaries. We have to fill the objectives of the grant and the objectives of the beneficiaries themselves. And we must safeguard the funds and make sure that they are appropriately managed and spent. That is our responsibility as Rotarians. It's partly our club cash, but it's also Rotary Foundation cash that we are managing. So we have really a responsibility to all Rotarians because it is our collective funds that we're spending. And I want to point out that grant management and the reporting is the responsibility of both the international and the host club. If you're the international club, the host bank account, they have the bank account in the host place, they're doing the project. Don't feel hands off. Keep very close tabs on what is going on, how the funds are being managed, because your club is just as responsible as the host club is. That's really important to remember. I think I did a quick, here we go. Okay, so what does proper grant management mean? Firstly, you must document all of your expenditures on a grant, save all of your receipts and your invoices, and keep a log of all of those expenses. While you don't have to submit each and every receipt, it is good to have that log, have your receipts on file, You can upload a log of all your expenses. And then if there's any questions and receipts that you haven't submitted that the reviewer wants to see, you've got them all right at your disposal. You can easily send them to them. You must retain all of your bank statements. Now, the bank statements are required as part of your reporting. So keep track of all of those because they are guaranteed to want to see all of your bank statements showing all of the in and out activity in that project account. There are regular reports that are done. These are submitted online as you will get reminders when it's time for them to be done. You'll go onto My Rotary to your grant, click on report, and it asks you the questions and fill them out. Doing the reports is really quite simple. They'll ask very specific questions, which you'll be able to answer because you're so familiar with the project and what's been going on. They'll ask you to send in the bank statements, and you just upload them as PDFs. Things are so much easier now that it's all electronic. So those reports will be due annually, and you must do a final report within 2 months of the project completion. And we really strongly recommend that you take pictures of the project before initiation, and then during, and then after. And of course, what that means is very specific to whatever your project is, but try to get some before, during, and after pictures. It's good proof of what you did to be used in your reporting. It's also things you can upload and share with others on matchinggrants.org, on Rotary projects. Show your club for presentations to help build their enthusiasm for the great work that you and the Rotary Foundation are doing together. Pictures are very important. So it's also important that you spend your grant funds only on items in the grant application. Now, we all know that things change, and this last year and a half has been a very good example of that. If something happens during the project phase and you somehow need to alter your spending plan significantly, contact the Rotary Foundation in advance for approval. In my experience, it's been, if you contact them in advance, there's a reason for what the change is, and the change is still very much in line with the intent and goals of the project and meeting the needs of the beneficiary, they're going to allow you to do that. It's much more difficult if they see variances in the spending and then have to ask questions. Even if it's been done with fully good intention. Note that if you are under budget on your project budget, you can contact the Rotary Foundation in advance for permission to spend those remaining funds in some other way. Now, if you do this, it's important that how you spend those funds has to do with the same project. For example, if you said you were going to buy 10 computers and you were able to get a really good deal and it ended up costing you a lot less, now you can buy additional computers. If you ask permission, they're going to say, of course, as long as there's a need for those additional computers. What they won't allow you to do is, well, we're working in this community to build computers and they need some medicine at the health clinic. That is a different project. It's not related to the original grant, and those types of expenditures they usually do not approve. So that's just a little guidance. I certainly am not the one that would approve or not approve, but that is what I have seen. And then at the end of the project, any of the unspent funds do need to be returned to the Rotary Foundation, and the specific rules for that are in the Global Grants Guide. So with that, we've been at this for over an hour now, and I know that's really hard on Zoom. So I will kind of try to wrap up, and there's a slide here which has a number of different resources where you can find additional information. I've talked probably ad nauseum now about the Grant Center, which has just about everything you need. There's also some resources on our district website under Foundation where it says resources and references. You can find some things there, including a copy of our district's grant guidelines. And then on our zone website, which you see here at rotary2627.org, you can go on the top, go under TRF, and then click Resource Guide. This is a downloadable document with hot links that has just about everything you could imagine that has to do with the Rotary Foundation in general, not just grants, but everything about the Rotary Foundation. It has contact lists for people at the Rotary Foundation and the different areas of focus. There's all kinds of really valuable information there. So with that, I would like to tell you that the DDF allocations for global grants for the 21-22 Rotary year will be considered starting immediately. We've done this the last several years. We've started to consider that as soon as we finish grant training. So our Rotary Foundation Committee meets on Monday, and any fully funded grants for next Rotary year, we'll start considering the DDF for those right away. So I encourage you to get to work and try to get those in as quickly as possible, because I anticipate before next Rotary year is over, we will run out of funds as we did this year. And with that, I would like to say thank you from the Rotary Foundation for all the great work you do, and thank you from myself personally for the same and for your attention. I hope this was beneficial. It's a lot more fun when I can see lots of smiling faces out there, but I'm happy to answer any questions. You can send them to me at my email, which you see there on the screen, or we have time now. People can hang on for as long as they'd like to, and I'll answer as many questions as I can.
So Janice, I had a couple of questions in the chat while you were presenting. I'll give you those. First one was from Alan Turner of RB. He wanted to know for the international club, the 15% requirement. Does that include the district DDF, or is that just the club's contribution?
That can be it needs to be of the total budget. So it's the DDF and cash from the international district. So it could be all DDF, it could be cash, it could be anything. Remember, there's districts in other parts of the world that will do projects that their district will approve DDF for a project without club cash.
Okay, so it doesn't have to just be the club's money.
No, it can be DDF.
Good. And then I think Marge answered this other question, and that was, are photographs required of the project?
They are not required, but they are strongly encouraged. And I have seen Rotary International come back sometimes with reports where they're requesting pictures, probably to justify something in the report or something like that. So they're not a hard and fast requirement, but I have seen TRF request it in reports later.
Okay, and then Dwayne was just trying to get his arms around how much money has been allocated in the last year or 2 years. How many global grants have we actually done?
I have all of that on spreadsheets and I can quantify that. Dwayne, if you want to send me an email, I'll get that for you. I usually report that in our foundation seminar, which usually happens in November. I put all that together and I'll say, this is what we've done the last year for this amount of budget. Can't tell you off the top of my head, but I know exactly how to get the data and I'll be happy to give it to you.
I didn't want you to go into any trouble, Janice. As we're doing all this, I'm thinking of all these people all over the world that are benefiting. I just wondered how many people it was, but please don't go to any work. I can attend the meeting where you presented. Thank you, though. And thank you for the presentation.
Oh, you're most welcome.
I think this is a logistical question, but the question is, during fundraising, where there are club cash donations, Does matching funds increase as club cash increases?
I'm not sure I understand. I assume we're talking about DDF. So
Must be, yes.
for example, if you have, if your club, you're the primary club and you do $5,000 of cash and then you use your $5,000 of DDF, that's the maximum that you can. But if you work together with another club and that other club, say, wants to do $2,000 of cash, then they can get another $2,000 of their allocation of DDF. So in that situation, you've gone from 5,000 to 7,000, and you can keep adding that up. So you can add up a number of clubs, district designated funds component, up to $40,000 for a very large project. I hope that answers the question. I'm not 100% sure.
Janice, I have a question.
Sure.
So the project-specific bank account that you talked about, so the cash that our club has given, and I mean, we can open that project-specific bank account, right? Our club opens that account, right?
Well, sometimes you order, it depends on where the project is happening and logistically, what's the best thing. It is typically either opened by the international club in their geographic location, or more commonly by the host club, because that's where the funds are more likely to actually be spent.
Okay.
But there are situations where maybe the host, it's not considered safe to have the bank account in the host country. So clubs choose to keep it in the international club's country and then send the funds over on a bit by bit basis as needed. So it can really be in either place, if you will, which sounds kind of funny to say in this day and age because most of our banking is all electronic anyways. But
and so okay, so whether it's in the host countries, in the host country or here, our cash from our club will go into that account, and that will avoid the 5%.
yes.
Okay, and then the DDF matching that we get from the district, that will also go into that account.
Yes.
And then the TRF money will also go into that account.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Janice, I have a question. In terms of contributions, does it have to be only from Rotary, or could be a contribution from other organization that is not Rotary?
It can, well, many of the yes, it can be from any source, if you will. There's places on there where you can talk about different donations. Very often people get donations for projects and they have it go through their Rotary Club, but that is not a requirement.
So in that case, then would that amount of money be considered as a contribution to, let's say, my club, or it has to be in terms of getting the contribution from DDF or TRF, etc.? How is that impacted?
If it goes through your club, then it can be considered your club's cash contribution.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
So it will be recommended to do that way, or separate?
It depends on your situation. Maybe you can contact me offline and we'll talk specifically about it.
I would.
That's probably better.
Thank you.
Janice, I just want to ask a quick question. If you are going to send the money to the bank, do you need to change anything on the financing for a page, or does it stay the same in submitting the application to TRF?
The application stays the same.
Thank you.
Janice,
Yes?
I just want to make a comment. In order to receive the DDF from the district, all participating clubs from our district must meet the criteria, right? Not just the host club or the international club.
What's that? No, that's not true.
Well, in order for you, if two clubs in our district want to combine, for each of them to get their own DDF match, they each have to meet the $100
Yes, yes,
per cap
yes.
criteria.
And any club that is contributing to the district grant has to meet the club qualification criteria that we went over in the presentation.
Janice, this is Alan Turner from RB.
Yes.
When I first started looking at the MOU for signature, it was that rather intimidating that we needed to have a bank account for each global grant as a participating club. But then I realized it's not as a participating club, it's only as the TRF sponsor, host, or international club that needs the dedicated bank account.
Yes, there's one bank account for the project.
Janice, this is Marge Cole. I just want to let people know that we've been sending out the monthly contribution report at the end of every month to the club president and foundation chairs and the assistant governors, so that all of the clubs are up to date on whether they're at the $50 per capita level or the $100 per capita level. If you're in the club that you don't see this, ask your club president for it, because they're getting it at the end of, like I sent out the one for March a few days into April, so we had all the March donations recorded. If your club president hasn't received it for some reason, send me an email, and it's easy. It's marge.cole@yahoo.com. I'm happy to send out the monthly contribution report, because at this point, if your club's going to be applying, you need to get your giving up for district grants and for global grants.
Doug, you have a question, Doug. Go ahead. Yeah, you're muted, Doug. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. Just to clarify on the 5%, if I want to put $3,000 in, I'm going to have to pay, and it's going to go through TRF. When I actually write a check, I don't write it for $3,000. I write it for $3,150. So that extra 5% is never something you add into the matchinggrants.com page.
Correct. Correct. It's just the project pledge amount that's going for the project, not the administrative fee.
And that can confuse people that aren't used to the project. They actually have to pay a little more than what it says. Okay.
Anything else?
Well, thank you, Janice, for your presentation today. I think it was very informative and meets the requirements to participate in global grants.
Okay, and the recording of this, as well as my slide deck, will be available on the district website, so you can refer to it.
All right.